The information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Foundation podcast with Andy Duncan, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Okay, hello and welcome to this Gold Money Foundation podcast with me, your host, Andy Duncan. I'm at the Mises Institute and the Austrian Economics Research Conference, and I've been watching some fantastic speeches today, and one of those was the F.A. Hayek Memorial Lecture, as sponsored by Toby Baxendale of the Cobden Centre, and the speech was delivered by Nikolay, who works for a large public international organisation. Hello, Nikolay.
Hello, Andy.
It's great to be speaking to you. Now, the title of the speech was quite a meaty title, From Monetary Nationalism to Monetary Imperialism, Fractional-Reserve Banking and Intergovernment Cooperation. Now, you are both an Austrian and somebody who works for a large public international organisation. How do you feel about those two things being in the same sentence?
It's a good question. I think it's a mutually beneficial relation. Policymakers need advice from people who get the big picture. They need economists who can make qualitative predictions, analyze the short-term and long-term impact of the different policy measures, challenge the accepted ideas, be able to draft to write papers and to express sometimes actually a dissident view in an understandable way. And Austrian economists quite clearly are the best specialized in these areas. We do have a comparative advantage relative to econometricians or purely mathematically and theoretical economists. So I feel that international public organizations do get a benefit from employing an Austrian economist. Now, from the other side, let's imagine that an Austrian economist goes and works for a private international organization. Well, as a matter of fact, he would be doing exactly the same thing. Big private international enterprises have also to know in which world they live, what will be the expected impact of this or that government policy, how will be the future deficits shaped in order to make proper investment decisions. Yeah. As a matter of fact, the real distinction is not between Austrian or non-Austrian economists, it's between good economists who can provide proper advice. And both the public and the private sector need this.
One of the things you spoke today about in your speech was, and some of the advice you were giving, is how that you want us to get to a market-driven monetary and banking system. Can you just, for our listeners, can you just summarise how you think we can get to a market-driven monetary and banking system?
Well, as a matter of fact, the question of the transition or of the reform to be implemented is something which I have left untouched in my speech. So it's very good that you raised this question. This gives me the opportunity to complement it with a few remarks. The entire shaping of policies, especially in the financial sector, consists in the so-called financial sector safeguards. And these safeguards more or less imply additional privileges to financial institutions or to investors or to borrowers. Now, I don't believe that with a deliberate policy action you can remove these or that deliberately you can propagate a market-oriented reform. What will most probably happen is that the current policies, which are fundamentally policies of interventionism, will lead to a significant worsening of the economic and financial conditions. And what we can imagine will eventually develop in the future is a scenario of hyperinflation. And in this scenario of hyperinflation, there are two actors which will need to be reformed. One is, of course, the central bank, which will have to print more and more money at that time in order to accommodate people's demand for cash, people's demand for withdrawals of deposits. Banks will be in a situation in which they will be losing significantly liquidity. and this liquidity will be provided by the central bank. And at that time, there will be a flight into real goods. So, in my view, is that the current policies there will ultimately result in a situation in which a big choice will have to be made. Do we continue in the way we have lived until now, or do we, at that time, try to implement a market-oriented financial sector reform? I don't think that we can nowadays do this. This could be done only in a different world, under other conditions, when indeed everybody will recognize the necessity for a fundamental change. And then at that time, one has to make the choice between commodity money and paper money, between fractional reserve banks and 100% reserve banks. And the essential ingredient at that time will be just an increase in economic freedom, allowing people to naturally turn to commodity monies, not preventing this by legislation, and allowing financial institutions to offer a non-standardized and non-governmentally controlled financial products.
Yeah. Now, when you're hopefully, if this situation happens and you're standing ready to help these public bodies sort things out, you will have to wrap that kind of direction and that advice inside what they will call a policy framework. What will you be saying is your first policy, and what's the primary, say, 1, 2, and 3 policies to introduce to get us to this, to take away? I mean, your policies are probably going to be take away stuff. What things will you be advising them to take away first of all?
Okay, the first thing first, not to take away, but to add, so to speak.
Okay.
The first thing to add will be to let individuals freely choose their money.
Yeah.
So if at that time, and I suspect this will happen, there is a natural discovery of the commodity monies, this should not be prevented by government. So that's the first thing.
Yeah.
In a sense, actually governments could actively promote this. So the first advice then would be not to implement legal tender legislation, but actually to remove legal tender legislation.
Yeah.
With respect to the banking sector itself, we can imagine also that banks, after a financial debacle, will start with very high reserve ratios, potentially 100% reserve ratios. Well, then the thing to do next is for the government at that time to make it clear that it will not provide any guarantee on deposits.
Yeah.
So deposit guarantee scheme is something which in a future world, post dramatic hyperinflationary crisis, should not be added to the financial landscape. These are probably the two major things: removal of legal tender legislation and removal of policy actions, one of which is the deposit guarantee scheme, which creates the moral hazard that we have nowadays, raising the expectations of the financial institutions that they will be bailed out.
Yeah. Now, the Austrian school is usually seen as being against government economic intervention. Do you think it's a valid thing for Austrians to embed themselves inside governments and government bodies and to help governments move to a free market system, or should we just stay on the sidelines and do what many of us do at the moment?
Once again, it is illusory to believe that nowadays, in the current environment, that there will be a deliberate policy change. Yeah. But still, if you look how historically policy making has developed for the last 40 or 50 years in Europe, some government policies did improve financial stability and economic freedom. There is something like a free movement of capital. The problem is that free movement of capital has been followed a few years later by a transaction tax, which is debated and so on. So in a sense, there are a lot of inconsistencies, but some of the policies that governments put into place are not necessarily opposite to improving financial and economic freedom. So from this point of view, there is a place that Austrian economists can play.
Okay.
There is a role for them.
So we can help nudge them in the right direction without losing sleep over it.
I hope so, yes.
Okay. Well, if anyone does want to see this fascinating, it was a 1 hour speech, wasn't it? This fascinating long F.A. Hayek memorial speech today at the Austrian Economics Research Conference, then please do go to Mises.org in, say, a week or so's time once they've uploaded it to their website. And aside from that, thank you very much for your time, Nikolay.
Thank you, Andy.
I know we've got some drinks and things outside for our kind of cookout this evening. So let's get down there in a minute, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy.
Subscribe to the Gold Money newsletter at www.goldmoney.com to receive email updates on new articles, videos, and iTunes podcasts from our Gold Research section.